Hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't just stand there hesitating at the door. Find a comfy spot. Would you like a biscuit? I've just made a fresh batch of ginger snaps. The smell always takes me back, you know. It's funny, isn't it, how a simple smell or a sound can unlock a door in your mind you'd long thought sealed shut. I was just sitting here, watching the steam curl up from my Darjeeling, and I noticed the littlest thing. See this crack? Right here on the handle of my old mug. It's been there for years, a tiny hairline fracture. Most people would have thrown it away, I suppose. But I can't. It's a reminder. You know, dear, I was just stirring my tea this morning, 1 sugar now, the doctor insists when I caught sight of my reflection in the spoon. Oh, these old hands. They've seen so much, held so much. And that's when I remembered the day everything changed. The day a crack appeared, not just in a teacup, but in my entire world. It was the autumn of 1958, a time of crisp leaves and even crisper words. I was standing in my mother's kitchen with a letter in my hand, a piece of paper that felt heavier than any stone, and a decision that would either save my family or tear it apart completely. It was a secret I had to carry, a burden that started with a simple, forgotten locket. The kitchen back then was the heart of our home, not like these modern kitchens, all sterile and white. Ours was a cozy chaos of warmth and scents. The air was always thick with the smell of my mother's baking, yeast from the bread rising on the windowsill, cinnamon from her apple pies, or the sharp, clean scent of lemons she used for her famous drizzle cake. The walls were a pale, buttery yellow, now faded and marked with the small, sooty fingerprints of my brother, Arthur, and me. A large, wooden table, its surface scarred with the history of our family, nicks from stray forks, a dark ring from a hot pan set down in a hurry, stood proudly in the center. That's where we did everything, our homework, our squabbles, our secret sharing under the dim glow of the overhead lamp. That particular afternoon, the late autumn sun was casting long, apologetic shadows across the linoleum floor. The wind was whispering outside, a lonely sound that seemed to snake its way through the window frames. I remember the sound of the kettle beginning to whistle, a shrill cry that mirrored the anxiety tightening in my chest. I was 17, on the very cusp of womanhood, or so I thought. I felt old enough to understand the weight of the world, but young enough to still be terrified by it. My mother, Eleanor, was at the sink, her back to me. She was a small woman, but she had a presence that could fill the largest of rooms. Her hands, usually dusted with flour, were scrubbing potatoes with a fierce determination. She was humming a tune, something by Vera Lynn, I think, a song about hope and returning home. It was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside of me. My father had passed 2 years prior, a sudden heart attack that had stolen the laughter from our home and replaced it with a quiet, persistent ache. He was a good man, a builder with calloused hands and a smile that could crinkle the corners of his eyes. He left us with a mountain of love, but also a hill of debts we were slowly, painfully, trying to climb. The letter was from our landlord, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose name sounded as stuffy and gray as he was. It wasn't the first letter, but its tone was different, final. It spoke of eviction, of deadlines, of a world where there was no room for sentiment or second chances. It said we had 1 month, 30 days to find the money or find a new home. And in post-war Britain, with my mother working part-time at the draper's shop, finding either felt like an impossibility. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, the crisp edges feeling like razors against my skin. How could I tell her? How could I add this colossal weight to her already burdened shoulders? She had lost the love of her life, and now she was about to lose her home, the sanctuary he had built for us. The kettle's whistle grew more insistent, screaming into the quiet tension of the room. I wanted to scream with it. Everything all right, love? My mother asked, her voice soft, not yet turning from the sink. She had a sixth sense, my mother did. She could read the silence better than most people could read a book. Fine, Mom, I managed to squeak out, my voice a pale imitation of its usual self. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into the pocket of my apron. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt like a spy in my own home, a traitor guarding a terrible secret. She finally turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes, a soft, weary blue, scanned my face. You've gone pale, Rose. Are you feeling peaky? Just a bit tired, that's all, I lied. The lie tasted bitter, like burnt toast. I hated lying to her. Our relationship was built on a foundation of shared truths, of late-night talks and secrets whispered into pillows. This lie felt like a crack in that foundation. She didn't press, but I saw the flicker of concern in her eyes. She moved to the stove, the humming stopped, and she poured the boiling water into our old brown teapot. The familiar ritual, the comforting aroma of strong tea, usually a balm to my soul, offered no solace that day. As she set the pot on the table, her hand brushed against a small, ornate wooden box that sat on the Welsh dresser. It was her jewelry box, though it held more memories than precious stones. "I was thinking," she said, her voice distant, "perhaps it's time we sold some of your grandmother's things. The silver locket, perhaps it's just sitting there, collecting dust." My breath caught in my throat. The locket? I hadn't thought about the locket in years. My grandmother had given it to me on my 10th birthday, a small, silver oval with intricate etchings of forget-me-nots. It wasn't worth much in terms of money. I knew that. Its value was purely sentimental. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was what I had hidden inside it years ago. A secret from my father. A secret that, until that very moment, I had completely forgotten. A memory, sharp and vivid, pierced through the fog of my panic. Me, a girl of 15. My father sitting at this very table a few weeks before he died. He had a small, velvet pouch in his hand. His face was etched with a worry I was too young to fully comprehend. He'd made me promise, a solemn vow a daughter makes to her father. A promise to keep a secret until the time was right. Until we were in the direst of straits. He said it was a safety net, a last resort for his girls. And as I stood there, with the eviction letter burning a hole in my apron pocket and the scent of my mother's tea filling the air, I had a sudden, gut-wrenching realization. The direst of straits had arrived. The time for secrets was over. The key to our salvation, or perhaps our ruin, was not in some grand gesture or a stroke of luck. It was nestled inside a forgotten silver locket, a secret I was now terrified to unearth. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, each tick a countdown to a future I couldn't yet see. The decision was no longer just about the money. It was about a promise made to a ghost, and the potential consequences of breaking it. I had to get to that locket before my mother did, and I had to do it without revealing the desperation that was threatening to swallow me whole. The first step on a long and winding road had been laid, and I was about to take it, trembling and completely, utterly alone. The weight of my family's future had just settled squarely on my set shoulders, and oh dear, it was a heavy weight to bear. The moment my mother mentioned the locket, a new kind of panic set in, sharp and electrifying. It wasn't just about the eviction anymore. It was about the contents of that locket and the promise I had made to my father. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. I needed to get to my room, to that jewelry box on my dresser, without raising suspicion. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall felt like a hammer blow, counting down the seconds until my mother decided to act on her suggestion. "The locket?" I said, trying to keep my voice casual, light. I picked up a ginger snap, my hand shaking so slightly I prayed she wouldn't notice. "Oh ma'am, we can't sell that. Grandma gave it to me." It was a weak protest, and I knew it. In the face of losing our home, sentiment was a luxury we couldn't afford. She sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "I know, love, I know, but sentiment won't keep a roof over our heads. It's just a thought." She sat down at the table, pouring 2 cups of tea. The familiar clink of ceramic on wood was usually a comforting sound, but now it grated on my nerves. I need to finish my needlepoint," I stammered, backing away from the table. "For the school fete. It's due tomorrow." Another lie. The needlepoint lay abandoned in my basket, a half-finished flower that looked more like a colorful smudge. My mother just nodded, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her cup. She was lost in her own worries, and for that, I was selfishly grateful it gave me the cover I needed. I turned and practically fled the kitchen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the worn carpet muffling my footsteps. Our small house was filled with the ghosts of happier times, the faint scuff marks on the wall where Arthur and I used to race our toy cars, the creak of the 3rd step that we always tried to jump over. Today, these memories felt like accusations. My bedroom was small and simple, with a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a dressing table that had been my grandmother's. On it sat the jewelry box, Not the ornate one my mother had, but a simple wooden one I'd painted with bluebirds years ago. My hands fumbled as I opened the lid. There, nestled amongst a few beaded necklaces and a pair of pearl earrings my father had given me for my 16th birthday, was the silver locket. It was cool to the touch, the intricate forget-me-nots worn smooth by time. For a moment, I just held it, the weight of it in my palm, a tangible link to my past, to my father. I could almost hear his voice, a low rumble, full of warmth. "Rosie," he'd said that day, his eyes serious. "You keep this safe. Don't tell your mum, not unless things get really bad. This is for a rainy day, a real stormy one." I hadn't understood the gravity of his words then. To me, it had been a game, a secret mission between father and daughter. Now, the storm was here, and it was threatening to bring the whole house down. With trembling fingers, I worked at the tiny clasp. It was stiff, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought it was stuck. "Oh, please," I prayed to no one in particular. "Please open." Finally, with a faint click, it sprang open. The locket was designed to hold 2 tiny photographs, but both sides were empty. I had removed the faded pictures of my grandparents long ago to make room. On one side, nestled in the small oval space, was a tightly folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My breath hitched. This was it, the secret. On the other side, something small and hard was tucked beneath a tiny flap of silk lining. I used the tip of my nail to pry it out. A small brass key fell into my palm. It was tiny, almost like a doll's key, with an ornate, filigreed top. I had never seen it before. My attention turned back to the folded paper. My hands were shaking so much now that I could barely unfold it. It was a single sheet, covered in my father's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. It wasn't a letter, not in the traditional sense. It was a list of numbers and letters, a code of some sort, and at the bottom, a single sentence: "The lockbox is with the keeper of time." The keeper of time. What on earth did that mean? My mind frantically sifted through possibilities. A watchmaker, a historian, Mr. Henderson, the history teacher who always smelled of chalk dust. It was a riddle, and I had no idea how to solve it. I felt a fresh wave of despair wash over me. This wasn't the simple solution I had hoped for. It was another locked door, and I held only one of the clues. I sat on the edge of my bed, the tiny key digging into my palm, the cryptic note spread on my lap. The sounds of the house seemed to fade away, replaced by the frantic worry of my own thoughts. The keeper of time. My father was a builder, a practical man. He wasn't one for whimsical phrases or riddles. There had to be a logical explanation, something I was missing. I thought back to my father, to his habits, his routines. He would come home from a long day, his clothes covered in sawdust, and the first thing he would do was wind the grandfather clock in the hall. It had been his father's before him, a tall, imposing piece of dark mahogany that chimed on the hour. He called it Old Father Time. He would open the glass front, his large, gentle hands carefully turning the key. The keeper of time, my father. But he was gone. No, that couldn't be it. The lockbox is with the keeper of time. Not I am the keeper of time. It meant someone or something else. My eyes scanned my small room, looking for inspiration, for some forgotten memory. And then my gaze fell upon the wardrobe, and beyond it, the small, loose floorboard underneath the rug where Arthur and I used to hide our treasures. Marbles, a bird's egg, a forbidden comic book. Could it be that simple? Was my father's riddle not a riddle at all, but a simple statement of fact? The clock, the grandfather clock in the hall, Old Father Time. It was the keeper of time in our house. My heart began to beat a little faster, a fragile hope taking root. I had to get back downstairs, but I couldn't just march up to the clock and start searching it. My mother would see. I needed a distraction. I quickly tucked the key and the note back into the locket, snapped it shut, and placed it back in the jewelry box. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, to wipe the panic from my face. I splashed some cold water on my cheeks from the basin on my washstand, the shock of it helping to clear my head when I returned to the kitchen. My mother was still at the table, a knitting basket now in her lap. The worry lines on her forehead seemed to have deepened. "Feeling better, love?" she asked, her needles clicking softly. "Much," I said, forcing a smile. "I think I'll go and give the hallway a good dusting. It's been ages." It was the most mundane, most normal excuse I could think of. a daughter helping with the chores. Nothing suspicious about that. That's my girl, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. Don't overdo it. I grabbed a dust cloth from under the sink, my hands feeling strangely steady now. I had a purpose, a clue. As I walked into the hallway, the grandfather clock stood before me, tall and silent, its pendulum swinging in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. It looked exactly as it always had, a familiar piece of our lives. But now, it held a secret. It was no longer just a clock. It was a lockbox, a treasure chest, a final gift from my father, and I was about to become a treasure hunter in my own home. I just prayed that whatever I found inside would be enough to save us. The chimes for the half-hour rang out, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo the hope and fear in my own heart. The search had begun. The hallway felt colder than the kitchen, or perhaps it was just the chill of anticipation that was seeping into my bones. The grandfather clock stood like a silent sentinel against the floral wallpaper, its polished mahogany surface reflecting my own pale, determined face. Old Father Time. It had to be. My father's words echoed in my mind. The lockbox is with the keeper of time. It was so like him, a man who found poetry in the practical. I started my dusting at the far end of the hall, near the front door, working my way slowly towards the clock. I ran the cloth over the small telephone table, lingering over the family photographs. There was one of my father, holding me as a toddler. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a picture of pure joy. A pang of grief, sharp and sudden, hit me. Oh, Dad, I miss you. I miss your guidance. I hope I'm doing the right thing. My mother's soft humming drifted from the kitchen, a fragile thread of normalcy in a world that felt anything but. I had to be quick. I couldn't risk her coming out to check on me. Reaching the clock, I began to dust its ornate carvings, my fingers tracing the familiar patterns of leaves and scrolls. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the steady tick-tock of the clock's mechanism. Where would he hide something? It had to be somewhere clever, somewhere no one would accidentally stumble upon it. I ran my hands along the sides, feeling for any loose panels or hidden catches. Nothing. I knelt down, my knees pressing into the worn runner on the floor, and examined the base. It was solid, heavy wood. The dust bunnies I disturbed made me sneeze, a small, explosive sound that felt deafening in the quiet hall. I froze, listening. The humming from the kitchen continued, uninterrupted. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I stood up and looked at the clock face. The long, elegant hands pointed to 10 minutes to 4. Below the face was the glass door, behind which the brass pendulum and the heavy weights swung in their steady, hypnotic dance. I remembered the key my father used to wind it, a large, ornate brass key that he kept in a small dish on the mantelpiece. But this was a different key. The one from the locket was tiny. My gaze fell on the door itself. It was locked, of course, to protect the delicate mechanism inside. The keyhole was small and dark. Could the tiny key from the locket be for this? It seemed too small, too delicate for such a large, heavy door. Still, I had to try. My hand trembled as I retrieved the locket from my apron pocket, shielding my actions with my body. I opened it and took out the tiny key. With a furtive glance towards the kitchen, I inserted the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly. My breath caught. It was a perfect fit. I turned it, and with a soft, satisfying click, the lock disengaged. My hand shaking, I pulled the glass door open. The air that wafted out smelled of old wood, brass, and lemon oil. The ticking was louder now, a complex, intimate sound of gears and levers working in perfect harmony. Now, what I peered inside. The two heavyweights hung on their chains, and the great brass pendulum swung back and forth, its polished surface catching the light. I scanned the interior, the floor of the clock, the wooden back panel. Nothing. No box, no hidden compartment. A knot of disappointment tightened in my stomach. Was I wrong? Was this another dead end? Don't panic, Rose, I told myself. Think my father was a builder. He knew how to construct things, how to hide things in plain sight. I looked again, more closely this time. My eyes traced the path of the weights. They hung from a pulley system at the very top of the clock's interior. My gaze traveled upwards, into the shadowy space above the clock face, an area you couldn't see unless you were really looking for it. I needed to see up there. I dragged the small, sturdy telephone stool over and stepped onto it. my head now level with the top of the clock. Peering into the dusty darkness, my heart gave a leap. There, resting on a small, wooden ledge built behind the ornate pediment, was a small, metal box. It was a simple, gray cash box, the kind a shopkeeper might use. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, clearly untouched for a very long time. It was here. He had hidden it here. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. I reached in, my fingers closing around the cold metal. It was heavier than it looked. I carefully lifted it out, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't want to upset the clock's mechanism or make any sudden noise. Once it was safely in my hands, I stepped down from the stool. I quickly locked the clock door, returned the tiny key to the locket, and pushed the stool back into its place. The whole operation had taken less than 5 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The box had a lock, a simple one that required a key. There was no key with it, but then I remembered the note, the numbers. It had to be a combination. I couldn't open it here. I needed privacy. I tucked the dusty box under my arm, covered it with the dustcloth, and walked back towards the kitchen, my mind racing. By the way, dear, where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It's funny, thinking back on it now, how my little world felt so small and yet so overwhelming then. I wonder if you've ever felt like that, like the weight of everything is resting on your shoulders in one tiny, quiet room. When I entered the kitchen, my mother looked up from her knitting. All done already? Just taking a break, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I thought I'd take this dusty old cloth outside and give it a good shake. The lie came so easily now, it scared me a little. I walked straight through the kitchen to the back door, the metal box feeling like a lead weight under my arm. Our back garden was small, with a patch of lawn and a few rose bushes my mother fussed over. At the very end was a small, dilapidated shed where my father used to keep his tools. It was my sanctuary now. I slipped inside, the familiar smell of sawdust, oil, and damp earth enveloping me. I put the box down on the old workbench, my hands coated in a layer of grime. Now for the note. I took it out again, my eyes scanning the cryptic sequence, L17, R32, L8. It had to be a combination lock. Left, right, left. I wiped the front of the box and saw the small combination dial. My heart pounded. This was the moment of truth. Everything hinged on this. I took a deep breath and began. I turned the dial to the left, past the 17, and then back to it, then to the right, past the 32, and back, and finally, to the left, stopping on the 8. I pulled the latch. It didn't budge. No, couldn't be. I tried again, my movements more frantic this time. L17, R32, L8, nothing. The latch was firmly shut. Tears of frustration pricked my eyes. To have come so far, to have found the box, only to be thwarted by a lock I couldn't open. It was cruel. I sank onto an old wooden crate, the box sitting on the bench, mocking me with its silence. What did I miss? What was I doing wrong? The hope that had buoyed me just moments before evaporated, leaving a cold, hard dread in its place. The future, which had seemed for a fleeting moment to be within my grasp, was once again a terrifying, locked uncertainty. Sat there in the dusty gloom of the shed for what felt like an eternity, the cold of the metal box seeming to seep into my very soul. The smell of oil and old wood, usually a comfort, now felt like the scent of failure. The combination hadn't worked. Tears of frustration streamed down my face, leaving clean tracks through the grime on my cheeks. I had been so sure, so certain. The keeper of time, the key, the note, it had all fit together so perfectly. To fail at the final hurdle felt like a personal betrayal by fate itself. I picked up the box again, shaking it. Something shifted inside with a muffled thud. It wasn't empty. That much was certain. I stared at the combination dial as if my sheer will could force it to open. L17, R32, L8. What was I missing? My father was a meticulous man, a man of details. He wouldn't have left a clue that was wrong. The error had to be mine. I took a few deep, shuddering breaths, trying to push down the rising tide of panic. Think, Rose. Think like your father. I smoothed the crumpled note on my knee, studying his handwriting again. The numbers were clear. There was no ambiguity. L for left, R for right. It was straightforward. Or was it? My mind went back to him, trying to conjure his image at his workbench, right here in this shed. He was always tinkering with something. A radio, a broken chair, a squeaky hinge. He had a peculiar way of doing things, a logic that was all his own. I remembered watching him fix my bicycle chain once. He had laid all the pieces out on a clean rag, in a specific order. Everything has its place, Rosie, he'd said. You just have to find it. His place, his logic. What was his logic? I looked at the note again. L17, R32, L817, 32-8. They were just numbers, or were they? My eyes scanned the shed, desperately searching for some connection, some hidden meaning. They landed on a shelf above the workbench, cluttered with old paint tins, jars of screws, and a row of my father's old notebooks. He kept notebooks for everything. Job estimates, measurements, sketches of projects. They were filled with his neat, practical script. With a surge of renewed energy, I stood up and reached for the notebooks. I pulled one down, its cover soft with age, and blew the dust off. I flipped through the pages. A chronicle of his working life. Lists of timber, costs, drawings of kitchen cabinets, calculations for roof trusses. I sat back down, the notebook in my lap, the lockbox beside me. I started looking for the numbers from the note. 17, 32, 8. I skimmed page after page. There were hundreds of numbers, thousands. This was hopeless. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. I was about to give up, to toss the book aside, in despair, when a particular page caught my eye. It wasn't a list of measurements. It was a list of names. And next to the names were dates. It was a list of birthdays of all our family and close friends. My mother, Eleanor, April 12th. My brother, Arthur, August 3rd. And there, near the top, was my name. Rose, October 17.17. My breath caught in my throat. L17. Rose, 17th. Could it be that simple? My eyes darted down the list, searching. About halfway down, I found it. His best friend, a man I called Uncle Frank, though he was no relation. Frank Miller. January 32nd. No, that wasn't right. January 32nd. My brow furrowed. There is no January 32nd. I read it again. It was clearly written, Frank Miller, June 32. A typo. My father wasn't one for typos. Then, it hit me. Frank's birthday was January 23rd. He must have transposed them. Oh, or was it intentional? R32, 32 instead of 23. My heart started to pound again, this time with a frantic, electrifying hope. One last number. 8. I scanned the list again, and there it was. His own entry. George, March 8th. My father's birthday. L8. It wasn't just numbers, it was dates. His family. His people. L for love. Maybe. R for ... Remember. No. That was too fanciful. Left, right. He was a practical man. But the numbers themselves, they were personal. They were a map of his heart. And the 32. My father and Uncle Frank were always playing jokes on each other. Transposing the numbers of his birthday sounds exactly like something my father would do, a private little joke encoded into his final secret. With trembling hands, I turned back to the lockbox. I felt a strange sense of connection to my father, as if he were there in the shed with me, guiding my hands. This time, I didn't rush. I took my time, my movements deliberate and precise. I spun the dial to the left, to clear it. Then I began. Slowly, carefully, I turned the dial to the left, passing 17 twice, and landing squarely on it the third time. The lock gave a faint, almost imperceptible click. Then, I turned it to the right, passing the correct number, 23, once, and landing on it the second time. Another soft click, louder this time. The transposed number, 32, was the trick, the key, my father's little joke. Finally, I turned the dial back to the left, stopping directly on 8. I held my breath, the silence of the shed pressing in on me. I placed my thumb on the latch and pushed. This time, it moved. With a solid, metallic thunk, the lock disengaged. I let out a shaky sob, a sound that was half grief, half triumph. It was open. He had trusted me to be clever enough, to know him well enough, to solve his final riddle. For a moment, I just stared at the closed lid, almost afraid to see what was inside. This box held the answer to our future. It could be salvation, or it could be a disappointment that would break me. Taking one last fortifying breath, I lifted the lid. The box was lined with worn, red velvet, and inside, nestled neatly, were stacks of banknotes, not just a few pounds, but thick bundles of them, held together with rubber bands. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. My eyes, wide with disbelief, took in the sight. There were shillings, and pounds, and even a few crisp 5-pound notes. A quick, frantic count of one of the bundles told me it was a small fortune. Tucked to one side of the money was a small, folded envelope. My name, Rose, was written on it in my father's hand. My fingers trembled as I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Rose," it began, "if you are reading this, then the storm has come, and I am no longer there to shelter you. I am so sorry. I saved this money over many years, a little from each job, for you and your mother. It's not a king's ransom, but I hope it's enough to see you through the worst of it. Use it wisely, pay the debts, keep the house, but most importantly, Rose, look after your mother. Her heart is not as strong as her will. And know that I have always, and will always, love you more than words can say. Be brave, my girl. Your loving father." The letter was dated just 2 weeks before he died. He must have known he was unwell. He had been preparing for the storm all along. The tears I had been holding back now flowed freely, dripping onto the bundles of money, baptizing them in grief and gratitude. This wasn't just money, it was my father's love made tangible. It was his last act of protection, his final gift. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my apron pocket, close to my heart. I looked at the money, the answer to our prayers, the eviction notice, Mr. Abernathy, the constant worry. This box could make it all disappear. But with this discovery came a new burden, a burden of knowledge. My mother couldn't know where this came from. The official story would have to be the sale of her mother's jewelry. This secret, this final gift from my father, would have to be mine and mine alone to carry. The weight on my shoulders had changed, but it hadn't disappeared. It had simply transformed from the weight of despair into the weight of responsibility. I closed the lid of the box. The future of our family now resting safely inside. Carrying the lockbox back to the house felt entirely different from carrying it to the shed. Before, it was a burden of unknown potential, heavy with mystery and desperation. Now, it was heavy with a known reality, a tangible secret that I had to guard with my life. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the garden that seemed to mock the shadows in my own heart. The relief was immense, a warm, spreading wave, but it was complicated by the fresh grief for my father and the new weight of the secret I now carried. I couldn't just walk into the house with a box full of cash. My mother, for all her weariness, was sharp. She would see the change in me, the relief in my eyes, and she would have questions I couldn't answer. I needed a plan, a story that was believable and simple. My father's letter had given me the key. Look after your mother. That meant protecting her not just from poverty, but from the painful knowledge that he had been secretly preparing for his own death. I went back into the shed and found an old, sturdy canvas bag that my father used to carry his tools in. I carefully transferred the bundles of money from the lockbox into the bag, tucking the box itself away on a high shelf, behind a stack of old tarps. No one would find it there. The canvas bag was heavy. I slung it over my shoulder, the weight of it a constant, physical reminder of its contents. My story began to form in my mind. The locket. My mother had suggested selling the locket and other small pieces of my grandmother's jewelry that would be the foundation of my tale. It was a partial truth, which always makes for the most convincing lie. I would have to embellish, to build a fiction around a seed of fact. When I re-entered the kitchen through the back door, my mother was still knitting, but her hands were still she was just staring out of the window, a forlorn expression on her face. The sight of her quiet despair solidified my resolve. I would bear this secret for her mum, I said, my voice softer than I intended. She turned, her eyes landing on the canvas bag in my hand. "What's that, love?" I did something. I started, allowing my voice to tremble a little. I didn't have to fake the nerves. They were very real. "You were talking about Grandma's jewelry, about selling it. I know how worried you've been, and I couldn't stand it anymore." I walked over to the table and emptied the canvas bag onto the worn wooden surface. The bundles of money tumbled out, making a soft, rustling sound that seemed to fill the entire room. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her knitting slid from her lap and fell to the floor, unnoticed. "Rose, where did you get this?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. I took the locket, I said, my voice gaining a bit of rehearsed confidence, and the pearl earrings Dad gave me, and Grandma's old brooch. I took them to that jeweler in town, the one with the dusty window, Mr. Goldstein. I invented him on the spot, giving him a name to make him seem more real. I told him our situation. I told him we were desperate. I paused, letting the story sink in. I had to make it sound plausible. He was a very kind man, Mum. He tested the gold in the locket and the brooch. He said it was older and purer than he thought, and the pearls, ... He said they were very fine quality. These were all lies, of course. The locket was silver, worth next to nothing, and the pearls were simple cultured ones. But my mother didn't know that. He ... He gave you all this for those few things. Her voice was skeptical, but there was a desperate glimmer of hope in her eyes. She wanted to believe me. Not just for those, I continued, adding another layer to the fiction. He asked if we had anything else. I remembered the old silverware in the sideboard, the set we never use. I ran all the way home and brought it back to him. He said the price of silver is high right now. He weighed it all. He was very fair, Mum. He even gave me a little extra. He said, for a girl with an honest face trying to look after her mum. The story felt flimsy to me, full of holes. But I was counting on my mother's desperation to blind her to them. I was counting on her desire for this nightmare to be over. She stood up and walked slowly to the table, as if in a dream. She reached out a trembling hand and touched one of the bundles of cash, as if to confirm it was real. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not the tears of despair I had seen earlier. These were tears of relief, of a burden lifted. "Oh, Rose," she cried, pulling me into a fierce hug. "My clever, brave girl. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have had to." She was sobbing into my shoulder, and I held her tight, my own tears starting to fall. I cried for my father, for the secret I was keeping, and for the loss of the simple, honest relationship I'd had with my mother until this afternoon. "We can pay Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice muffled by my cardigan. "We can stay in our home." "Yes, Mum," I said, stroking her hair. "We can." That evening, the atmosphere in our little house was transformed. The oppressive cloud of worry had lifted, replaced by a light, almost giddy sense of relief. My mother hummed as she cooked dinner, a proper dinner, not just the toast and soup we'd been having for weeks. We even listened to the wireless, something we hadn't done in ages. Later that night, my mother took the required amount of money to pay the landlord for the next several months, wrapping it carefully in a handkerchief. She made me promise that we would put the rest away, for a real emergency, she said. Oblivious to the irony. As I lay in my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I should have felt triumphant. I had saved our home. I had protected my mother. But I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I had created a chasm between my mother and me, a space filled with a secret that could never be spoken. The truth was my father's final gift, but the lie was now mine to maintain. The journey that had started with a letter in the kitchen had reached a destination of sorts. We were safe, for now. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was not the end of the story. The money would solve our immediate problems, but the secret had changed me. I was no longer just a daughter. I was a guardian, a keeper of secrets, a 17-year-old girl who had learned the complex and heavy art of deception out of love. And I wondered how long I could carry that weight before it created new cracks in our carefully repaired world. The path ahead was no longer about survival, but about navigating the consequences of the choice I had made. The weeks following the sale of the family heirlooms were a strange mixture of profound relief and quiet, gnawing anxiety for me. On the surface, life returned to a semblance of normality, even a fragile kind of happiness. My mother's humming filled the kitchen once more, no longer the mournful, trailing melodies of Verything, but the more cheerful tunes that were popular on the radio. The lines of worry on her forehead began to soften. She even bought a new rose bush for the garden, a vibrant crimson one, she named the Gallant Girl, and she'd wink at me whenever she watered it. It was her little tribute to what she thought was my brave act. We paid Mr. Abernathy not just the arrears, but 3 months' rent in advance. I remember the day my mother went to his office. She came back standing taller, a look of quiet dignity on her face that I hadn't seen since before my father passed. That sight, more than anything, convinced me that the lie was worth it. We were no longer living on the edge of a precipice. waiting for the ground to crumble beneath us. The money, hidden away in a biscuit tin at the back of the pantry, was a silent guardian, a buffer against the harsh realities of the world. But for me, the secret was a constant companion. Every time my mother would mention the kindly Mr. Goldstein, a man I had conjured from thin air, I would feel a jolt of panic, a fear that my carefully constructed story would unravel. I lived in dread of a stray question, a slip of the tongue, that would betray the truth. My brother, Arthur, who was away doing his national service, wrote letters home filled with his usual cheerful chatter. My mother wrote back, telling him that our money worries were over thanks to my quick thinking and some old family silver. I read her words with a twisting gut, feeling like an imposter in my own family's narrative. The real challenge, however, came from an unexpected quarter. It came in the form of a young man named Thomas. He worked at the local library, and I'd known him peripherally for years. He was quiet, with kind eyes and a smile that always seemed to reach them. A few weeks after the drama with the lockbox, I had gone to the library to escape the confines of my own head, to lose myself in someone else's story for a few hours. Thomas was there, stamping books with a rhythmic thud. He looked up as I approached, and his smile seemed a little warmer than usual. "Rose," he said, his voice soft, "I haven't seen you in here for a while. Everything all right?" His simple question, filled with genuine concern, almost undid me. I was so used to evasion and half-truths that straightforward kindness felt foreign. "Everything is much better now, thank you," I said, and the relief in my own voice was so palpable that he tilted his head, intrigued. We started talking about books, about the dreary weather, about the village gossip. It was easy. With him, I didn't feel the constant pressure of my secret. He wasn't part of that world. He was just Thomas, a gentle soul who smelled of old paper and ink. He started setting aside books he thought I might like. I started finding excuses to visit the library more often. Our tentative friendship slowly, shyly, began to blossom into something more. He would walk me home sometimes, our conversations filling the short distance from the library to my front gate. He told me about his dreams of becoming a writer, of seeing the world beyond our small town. I listened enthralled, but I shared very little of myself in return. I spoke of my father in the past tense, of my love for baking, of my worries for Arthur, but the core of my recent experience, the event that had fundamentally changed me, remained a locked room. How could I share my true self when my true self was built upon a lie? One crisp winter evening, as we stood at my gate under the pale glow of a gas lamp, Thomas took my hand. His was warm and steady. "Rose," he said, his gaze serious, "I feel like there's a part of you that you keep hidden away, a sadness you carry alone." His perception was so accurate it terrified me. I felt my defenses rise immediately. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice a little too sharp. I pulled my hand away. He looked hurt, but he didn't press. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to pry." That night, I lay awake, replaying the conversation in my mind. Thomas represented a future, a chance at happiness, at a life beyond the confines of my family's survival. But to step into that future, I felt I would have to bring all of myself, and part of myself was a liar. The secret that had saved my family was now poisoning my own chance at personal happiness. It was a wall between me and anyone who tried to get close. The turning point came a few months later. My mother had been having some chest pains, dismissing them as indigestion. But one afternoon, she collapsed in the kitchen. The doctor was called, and the diagnosis was severe angina, a weakness in her heart. My father's words from his letter screamed in my mind. "Look after your mother. Her heart is not as strong as her will." The doctor said she needed complete rest and expensive medication. The money in the biscuit tin, our safety net, was now needed for a new crisis. As I sat by her bedside that evening, holding her frail hand, I felt the full weight of my father's trust. The money wasn't just for rent. It was for this. It was for her life. The next day I went to the chemist to buy the medicine. It was more expensive than I had feared. As I counted out the notes, my hands steady, I realized something profound. The lie, the secret, the burden I had been carrying. It didn't matter as much as I thought. What mattered was my mother's health. What mattered was honoring my father's final wish. When I got home, Thomas was standing at my gate, a small bunch of daffodils in his hand. He had heard about my mother. He looked worried, his kind eyes full of concern. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. How is she? How are you? And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The wall I had built around my secret suddenly seemed pointless. The burden felt too heavy to carry alone anymore. I looked at his honest, open face, and I made a decision. I couldn't tell him the whole truth, not the part about the lockbox. That was my father's secret, not mine to share. But I could tell him my truth, the truth of the burden. Let's walk, I said. We walked to the small park at the edge of the village, the daffodils a splash of brilliant yellow in my hand. We sat on a cold, damp bench, and I told him. I didn't tell him about the money my father left, but I told him about the crushing weight of responsibility, a feeling like I had to be the strong one, of the loneliness of carrying my family's worries on my own. I told him about the fear of losing my mother, coming so soon after losing my father. I didn't give him the details of the fiction, but I gave him the truth of my feelings. He listened patiently, without interrupting. When I was done, a tear tracing a cold path down my cheek, he didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He just took my hand again, and this time, I didn't pull away. You're not alone in it, Rose, he said softly. Let me help you carry it. And, in his quiet acceptance, in his willingness to sit with my sadness without needing to fix it, I felt a crack appear in the lonely fortress I had built around myself. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a confession. It was connection. I realized that courage wasn't just about saving your family with a secret. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone else see the cracks, to share the weight of the carrying. The path ahead with my mother's illness was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I didn't have to walk it entirely by myself. The love of my father had saved our home, but the kindness of a gentle librarian was beginning to save me. The years that followed were a tapestry woven with threads of sorrow and joy, of hardship and grace. My mother's health remained fragile. There were good weeks, when she would be able to sit in the garden and direct my planting, her voice full of its old authority, and bad weeks, when she was confined to her bed, her breath shallow and her spirit low. The money my father had left, our secret miracle, became her lifeline. It paid for the best care, for the medicines that eased her pain, for the small comforts that made her days bearable. It was a slow, draining process, both emotionally and financially, but we never once faced the terror of destitution that had haunted us before. Thomas became my rock. He was a constant, steady presence in the chaos of our lives. He would read to my mother for hours, his calm voice filling the quiet sick room. He would bring me cups of tea when he saw the exhaustion etched on my face, and he would listen, always listen, as I navigated the difficult emotional terrain of being a caregiver. Our love deepened in the crucible of that shared experience. It wasn't a whirlwind romance of grand gestures, but a quiet, sturdy love built on mutual support, shared silence, and unwavering kindness. He never asked about the source of our funds again. He simply accepted that I had done what was necessary, and he loved me not in spite of the secrets I held, but for the strength he saw in me. We married a year later, in a small, simple ceremony in the village church. My mother was able to attend, frail but radiant in a wheelchair. Thomas pushed Arthur, home on leave, stood beside me, his eyes filled with a brother's pride. As I stood at the altar, looking at Thomas's dear, honest face, I felt a sense of peace settle over me that I hadn't known was possible. I had learned that you don't have to share every secret to share a life. What you must share is your heart, your vulnerability, your truth. My mother lived for 2 more years after our wedding. They were precious years. She got to see the beginning of my marriage, to share her wisdom and her recipes with me, to know that I was happy and loved. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, the grief was immense, but it was not laced with the bitterness of regret. We had done everything we could for her. My father's final gift had been spent, almost to the last penny, on giving his beloved Eleanor comfort and dignity in her final years. His mission, and by extension mine, was complete. After the funeral, Arthur and I were sorting through my mother's things. In her bedside table, tucked away beneath a pile of old handkerchiefs, we found a small envelope. It was addressed to me, in her familiar, spidery handwriting. My heart lurched. I opened it with trembling fingers. My dearest Rose, the letter began. There is something I have known for a long time, and something I must tell you. I know about your father. I know he left you the money. I found his letter to you, tucked in your apron pocket, the day you sold my jewelry. I had come upstairs to check on you, and you had left it on your bed. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed, the letter shaking in my hand. She had known. All this time, she had known. I never said a word. The letter continued, because I saw the burden you chose to carry for my sake. You thought you were protecting me from a painful truth, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift of all, peace of mind in my final years. But I want you to know, my brave, gallant girl, that the secret was mine to carry too. I knew my George, I knew he would never leave us unprotected. Your lie was a kindness, Rose, and I loved you all the more for it. I want you to let go of the weight of it now. Live your life with Thomas in the open, honest way you both deserved. True love isn't about having no secrets, my dear. It's about knowing which secrets are kept out of love. The tears that fell on that letter were not tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of release. The final, heavy stone of my secret, a weight I had carried for years, was lifted. My mother hadn't been fooled. She had been my silent partner, my co-conspirator in a loving deception. She had seen my sacrifice and honored it with her silence. In that moment, my love and admiration for her grew tenfold. Her heart had been stronger than any of us knew. The scene transitions back to the present day. The elderly Rose Nan is sitting in her cozy kitchen. The afternoon light has softened. The teacup with the hairline crack is held gently in her hands. And so, you see, this old cup, I keep it. My mother was drinking from it the day she collapsed. When I washed it later, I saw this tiny crack had appeared. For the longest time, I saw it as a symbol of the cracks in my own life, the secrets and the lies. I thought it represented something broken, but I was wrong. Oh dear, I was so wrong. It took me many, many years to understand it. This crack doesn't represent the breaking point. It represents the fact that it didn't shatter, it held together. Just like my family, just like me, we were cracked, yes, by grief, by hardship, by the weight of the secrets we kept for each other. But we never broke. The love held us together. It always does. The greatest lesson my father and mother taught me wasn't about money or survival. It was about the nature of love itself. Love isn't always about grand declarations and shouted truths. Sometimes, love is the quietest thing in the room. It's the secret you carry to protect someone's peace. It's the lie you tell out of kindness. It's the silent understanding between two hearts. It's the strength to bear a burden for someone else, and the grace to allow them to bear it for you. So, when you face your own storms, dear, and you will, remember that. Remember that strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being cracked and still holding together. It's about the love that seeps into those cracks and makes you whole in a new, more beautiful way. Now, how about another one of those ginger snaps? They're much better when you have someone to share them with.